Every stage needs a star. Every stage needs a star. Remember they said? I say every bar is a stage. Yes, I do. Yes, it is. Does every bar need a star? Let's discuss. I asked her when I first met her, not first thing as a pickup line, but once I felt we had some ease between us, I asked if she was rolling or felt rooted already, like the truth tree. See, that's how I've come to tell her. When patrons ask me where I'm from, how I've come to be here, I'm a transplant, like a lot of them. Don't know how that's helpful, or chemically how my confession helps the medicine go down. It was my Legion baseball coach, not who you'd hired, probably. The Legion was his place for getting plastered, walking distance to the front porch. One night, somewhere between the plaster and the porch, raised hand to volunteer. We were teenage boys in summer. Maybe missed his swing at father. Taught us lots of tricks, May, June, July, lost most our games. We didn't care. Coach bought the beer, and he seemed to take it better, like the losing was the aim. Then he'd build a fire in his backyard to decompress post-game. And he'd wait. He'd wait till every one of us had a bottle of High Life in hand. Then he'd talk about the truth tree and about the land. There was a tree a long time ago, lone grown on fertile prairie. From the moment first poked through the ground, was focused on surviving. Was terrorized by prairie dogs, frightened by the thunder, and determined its best chance was just to keep on getting taller. So it did. Until then, prairie dogs relied on it for shelter. And despite the fear of lightning, learned to welcome it as foreshadow of rain. The tree grew strong, gigantic, as any tree could hope to be. And with time, great acorns grew from branches, stretching out on every side. Great acorns that fell down, some, with help of rain, were buried in the earth, fertilized unknowingly by beasts roaming above them. Soon the saplings rose. Some survived and thrived and grew, produced acorns of their own, which fell and suffered through the same. And the struggle to grow tall and strong became a fight for space as well. Prairie, over time, in all directions, changed to forest, till the prairie was all gone. And an acorn, fallen on the edges, or amid them towering trunks, had little it could do but hope for rain to come before the forest creatures. Sunshine to break through blockade of leaves and branches. And those that did survive and grew, they found the thrill sprouting out of earth, enduring early struggles till they had a trunk to speak of, came to melancholic realizations that the earth on edge of prairie was one rocky son of a bitch. And the tree they fell from, which appeared so mighty from perspective dangling off of, was itself barely surviving all that time. The branches relieved when the acorns finally fell, so they could focus more completely on the desperate capture of the rain and light. Now, I don't know exactly what my baseball coach was getting at. Nobody dared to question he was paying for the beer, thus the podium was his. Now, when patrons are there, paid for podiums, ask how I got here. I like to retell the story of that truth tree, an old coach. And to say I'm just another one of them acorns that when fell to ground found no soil too seducing, kind of bounced on impact, began to roll. And on occasion lost momentum, nearly settled into ruts, but by fortune of nature, or mishandling by beasts, found my way again to roll. And honestly, though age and acorn I appear to be, feel no such inclination to prosper, form a tree. So I asked Selva if she as well felt like she was rolling, or more awaited rain rooted to fate where she was laid. And she said, I'm just trying to get paid. That's a real talk waitress. There's a job that wearies mind, hardens muscles, meet the face against their reflex purpose, transforms natural inclinations into tasks of labor, requiring reminder, every table just to smile. That smile goes in the package, encapsulated within the experience of drink. I'm not talking about a cocktail, pretty prepared, garnished, cased in glass. I'm talking literally the act itself, the singular drink. To recognize and maximize beginning, middle, end of that is really all we do. But how many of us really do? So, Selma, who is scheduled, has decided not to show. Now we are about to open, though she is not here. And that means we got a little something that we get to do without traditions. How would we maintain a society so civilized and sane? Don't answer. There was the shelling, then the floor, both sours, whiskey, then tequila, served in coupes, all photogenic, but strong enough to kill you. Followed by the Jocelyn, a sweet tiki rum concoction, then of course the Anne Marie, simply a heavy pour. I did not dare insult her with even the lightest garnish. Quality of that kind needs no more than a moment there to flourish in the air. This time, though, was different. Different in a decent kind of way. There will be no server today. Selva's given thus her notice. If you have a thirst, you'll have to pick a store or stand behind one. You can take drinks to your seating. Close out and leave a card for tab. But I won't step out there, as I'm sure you understand. Selva would be here if she wanted. Selva would be here if it mattered. Selva would be here if she worked here. Apparently she does not anymore. A martini was the end of it. As a Manhattan was the start. Not for Selva, but for
you know who. 20 years ago at 22, bar backing, first job after service, wasted 3-year tour of nowhere. Nothing doing. This was 1999, so I jumped ship just in time, some say. I've stopped wondering what it may have been. Anyway, a bar back then, in a dive down in the Mission on a sluggish midweek evening, just a couple in a corner. And the bartender yells for me, "AJ!" So I rushed in from the back with that ingrained sense of urgency from the service I was yet to shake. Says to stand behind the bar, keep an eye on a quiet couple while he dipped out for a piss or smoke. I can't remember which. Now, he'd done that to me once before, nothing had transpired, so I nodded as he vanished out the back into the alley. And the moment he was gone, this bardo blows in through the entrance in a strapless dress, tight-fitting, in the most flattering places. And she's got this look about her, full of sex appeal and swagger, leaning low and putting on a show while whispering her order. Manhattan up. And in that moment, everything I ever knew was worth as much as one found shoe, because I had no goddamn clue what Manhattan up might mean. Was it some sort of a code? Was there a method to decipher? Now remember, this was 99. I didn't have a phone to find an answer. So I stood there, probably staring at my patron's modest dress. She knew in a second. She had read me in blink. Her eyes looked me up and down, and she knew I'd never made a drink. She knew too from my get-up that I was not in my place, and she smiled, man. What a smile. She could sense how much I wanted to make for her that Manhattan. Not because it was my job or I'd have hustled for a tip, or even as a craftsman training, simply for the sake of pleasing, satisfying her request. So instead of showing disappointment, without hesitation, without switching of her order ever in consideration, she calmly talked me through each step, beginning with the coupe, through the rye and sweet vermouth, stirred and strained and finely poured. Her tone never condescended. Still I trembled as I served her, and I didn't realize as she tasted that I had leaned toward her, anxious to be judged. I'd never thought to tend a bar. My job was mostly juicing, stocking shelves till something better, when she sipped from lip of coupe and closed her eyes as though to concentrate, and let her head fall backward, bearing full, unblemished neckline, then returning head to face me and opening her eyes and smiling with a double blink, a wink to say a job well done, then pulling from her purse a $50 fucking bill, turning, leaving all that change for tip, though by then bartender returned, saw it, and turned back. After she left, he made me split the cash, but I did not in the least care. The whole way home I walked on air, and slept with eyes on the ceiling, knowing what I would be doing, what I still am doing now. 20 years running the rapids down the winding Whiskey River. Now, that's a lot of drinks. That's a lot of end-of-day happy hour specials, taking edges off the chips, wiping clear the chalkboard mind. A lot of first dates trying to use a bit of the old social lubricant, encouraging them into making moves. A lot of celebrations of reunions, of revivals, and a lot of quiet time consumers, nursing out a nervous need to be out in the scene. Every rite of passage reason for a rhyme, from proposals to promotions to the old world wakes with toasts of blue goodbyes. When they say please rise, And the elders struggle to their feet and use one hand to steady on the shoulder of a younger as they grasp their glass and raise in the sincerest of salutes. Better thee than we, to some fella gone before them down the only path ahead. For no matter, pen or penthouse, baby, everybody, even's dead. That brings me to my testimony, if you've got the time. It all started one night. There was this fellow on a center stool. He passed his daily limit and was trying to tell jokes. He was struck by his predicament, a man inside a bar. And it inspired him to submit his night's work interpretation as to the meaning of the many jokes that start a man walks in the bar. He said, "My friend, they're all the same." I nodded, because I did not care. Didn't sound like he was baiting me, more like a monologue volcano in the So I waited to be smothered, like you're being smothered now. Variation of a version of a truth. So I braced. And he asked, "You ever think about St. Peter? You know, the one who guards the gates of heaven, as that story goes." I confessed I had not thought about him in an effort. I was raised as a Catholic, thus do not subscribe to sainthood. He shook his head. "No, none of that. I'm talking about the setup. As a joke to have a punchline. As a character of comedy, and comedy is truth. The point of the St. Peter is not the saint, but gate behind him. Charon to the Greeks, no different, guided across that river Styx. And his point, this guy on Barstool, which he gradually got around to, was a grand consideration of the concept paradise, and the journey to arrive there, which required a transgressing, thus requiring gatekeeper, to deem the proper qualified, keep the riffraff out. Of course, most of those jokes end in refusal of admission. St. Peter's got his list, his rules, as well as his sense of humor. Most of the time, the hopeful parties are sent down the other way with a snarky line or two, rubbing salt in their damnation. So this guy, he's got one cheek on stool, suggests that all those heaven jokes are really just the afterlife. So a man walks in a bar, that the locale change means little. And I retort, of course, in bar jokes, everyone's already in the bar, not outside getting carded. I can see your point, I tell him, if bar jokes were mostly between the doorman and the subject, with Peter cast as doorman, though that sounds like a demotion. And this guy just shakes his head. Ever reposition in, and certainly well past the point at which I probably should stop pouring. And we are creeping close to closing time, that social order shame. Paradise, he says, insists, is not some sandy beach, but a sensation. It's not some gate where loved ones wait, but infinitely looping, pulsating flips of bliss. Now consider and contrast that with the way a bar is viewed. There are multitudes of types of spatial layouts and designs with one common denominator. And it ain't the ugly neon signs. It's the bar itself, which is very much a border crossing with its own sort of St. Peter. But instead of crossing through that gate to bliss, the bliss is brought to you. If Peter finds it worthy, then paradise pours in the glass. Paradise down throat consumed, thus chemically reacts, is whisked away throughout the bloodstream, like a holiday parade. And there you have it. Paradise, that sense of bliss, consumed and spread, working from within. He paused then, and I couldn't tell if finished or lost train of thought. I waited, He did not say another word. Found his wallet, paid, and stumbled out. So left to me to reckon what all that was about. Paradise pursuits. If some who come to me are really drawn to path of least complaint, if some who shuffle by outside have fear of resting cheek on store, betting on happy-go-luckies, hardly more than heaven guaranteed. Here, you simply request, and I supply with little restraint. For that man in center stool called me some kind of second-hand saint. Made me wonder if St. Peter would agree. And would he extend mercy for those who cannot maintain faith, find their way instead to me? I heard once in another closing time conversation that Rome, that is the Vatican, once came up with a scheme to finance via phantom fronts maintaining of an equal number of the vice establishments as there were the churches, even though the money to them would not find its way to coffers, even though to some that may seem like a counterintuitive scheme. But maybe that's what mercy is. It is not forgiveness granted from behind a curtain. Not either charity, giving of alms, or rehab programs. Pity is not mercy. Pity represents no action. Mercy is the act pity believes itself to be. So a man walks in the bar. Right? He sits down on the center stool, and he sees a second-hand St. Peter there on the other side. He smiles and asks, well, what's it going to be? Man says, shut of paradise, if you got some on the shelf. Peter shrugs and smiles and pours. Man throws it back with vigor, gulps it down, and goes to rest it. When return says, another if you wouldn't mind. Peter pours the glass again. Man throws back and fluid motion once again runs toward the tree, and when returns he points to glass as though to do another round, and Peter asks, how much paradise can one man want, or need, or take? Man sighs as he replies, sure looks pure as beauty in the bottle. It smells to die for when you lift it. Funny thing though, when you swallow, lands on fire in the belly, as a demon driving everything off the cliff. Peter cocks head, puzzled, ponders, why then do you drink it if it doesn't do the trick? Man shrugs. Hell, I thought that was the trick. If I'm to be this Peter type, for those who do not see clear passage into paradise, but rather water doses of seconds-long sensation, so I'll take that as my station, and I'll proudly plagiarize my pledge by right of trade tradition. Give me your lonely and salvation poor, your thirsty masses yearning to live free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these soul pirates, tempest tossed to me. I'll raise their glass and give a golden pour. A martini was the end of it. Of course it was. It had to be. The drink of man who thirsts for class. Drink of a nomad boy tribe. Trades in tribal recognition for a standalone condition. I told her, I remember, on her first day on the job, we don't prostrate to pretension. When it comes to Senor Martinez, I look back and trace a line from first night, that Manhattan, and me thinking, here's a drink I gotta master. Then with time learned it would be another, dominant and ever in demand. Different DNA depending who was ordering, depending what they come to the conclusion they prefer. So, I did my year's invention, catering with close attention to the specs that were requested by the masters who were often willing, as the manner born must be, to calculate my gratuity based quite directly on their palate's fine-tuned measure of how close my final offer came to what they were expecting. Based on, it was to be assumed, 1,000 thoughtful tastings in gin joints and haughty locales of a reputable name. Well, I served my time indentured, those years happily behind me, stuck between two torments, two ransom-waving times. In front your face, the first, holding tips until last minute, leveraging their knowledge of the limits of my wage. Other back behind you, working banker hours, delving out the best shifts based on politics. And I am not the baby-kissing kind. Still I stayed within that grind and found always an open door until I didn't. Then hit the road up to Vancouver for a temp festival gig, maybe a fresh start. And I pulled into a pit stop. And I wandered in a door under a sign lettered and lit in such a way I took it for a place where I would find industry kin. It was, though, a small sushi bar. One man behind a counter, 5 stools in front of him, by chance far right untaken. So I went and sat. Figured leads to down an import. Anyway, I sat down and I realized out of habit that the man on the other side of the bar does not offer a menu. So I look above him for a board with prices, just to check, just a barman's curiosity of how the place is run. I see no pricing up there. I can find nothing at all to suggest a list of options. Only floor-to-ceiling mirrors, lining every wall. And with still unclear the game here, I got something plated, served, freshly cut and expertly prepared. I look up at the chef and he has not bothered to wait. And I look around observing how the others equally were fed and was intrigued. So turned to girl beside me and I sheepish asked the skinny. And this girl quietly whispered, like a nun in church or child, but that chef selects the best fish from the catch come in that day. He knows better than we do, ultimum the way to serve it. That by sitting on a stool, we've agreed to trust his judgment, leaving us to revel in our pampered patron role. I U-turned from Vancouver, like the enlightened from the masters, cashed in my portion of the past, and opened my own place, with concepts then incorporated into what I knew about Mr. Martini and his mythic forms and his many fans who seemed to think that all that matters are the itemized ingredients and checklist processes employed. I felt that I could make a drink they'd like, a drink they'd love, based on the vibes from across this bar, and also how I felt, and how the ice was shaking on that day, and in that hour, how the energy within the space was interacting with the energy sweeping through the door. You know, there are so many factors, that imprint a small influence on the drink experience, beginning, middle, end. Consumption cannot be in vacuum. You can close your eyes and isolate your focus, but the elements around you will not be entirely ignored. The ambiance is not indulgence, optional by nature. You can hunker down and turn your back and choose not to engage, but it's there. It's in your glass, on your breath, between your sips, like a garnished, sight unseen citrus zest around the rim. And I factor that. Accordingly, your posture to the crowd when I pick the poison for your potion, for your paradise. That was a tipping point in my career, if I have permission for the term. There is an evolution if you fully embrace the onus. I could have spent the 20 years in single dive, drafts, and shots. I will not put them down. There's community in dives. Like a summer lady, no one is turned away, right? Or feels too underdressed for leaping in. I like types think themselves discerning, who might shudder instead of shrug the way I choose to make their want. Skeptics say I probably just recycle recipes, but this off-the-cuff stuff is no more than gimmick. Lazy, far less clever than a Bible-sized drink maker. But menus, no matter how exotic, still entice with guarantees. And I don't want to stimulate the type turned on by that. I want to turn them on by other means. And I told her on her first day, Selva heard me, Selva knew. There is no unspoken contract that obliges me to do whatever specifications paying patron doth desire. This is not a diner. This is Brother AJ's faith revival. Salvation for the blind tasting believers. You are more than taking orders. You are framing or removing frame from packed up premonitions. And I told her I will take the risk. My reputation as well as the rent here on the line. Of course, before placing the order, server must make clear the terms. Patron must communicate an openness to faith. And the server, Selva in this case, knows it's worth it for her. There were selling points to Selva, reasons higher than in the first place. She knew how to work the angle. She's been doing it since hips discovered. Only weakness was when cornered, kind of circus tiger-like. The fear whip, same as fear of no tip. And I knew she was vulnerable to personalities of strength. We talked it out a time or 10 after the bar was closed. And yesterday, what happened? What happened? Well, so far as I can reconstruct, Selva had this gentleman who had her working to his whim. Asked her, more insisted, a martini, blah, blah, blah. Basically just throwing out some phrases probably read about. But did so with finality, Selva perceived as closed off to conversion. And she knew I wouldn't love it. But I would have made it. After a roll of eyes, maybe some mutterings of soft rebuke. Instead, she chose to find us. Snuck behind this bar herself. Made that drink while I awaited. After she suggested it was okay if I dipped out for a piss or smoke. It doesn't matter which. Because she had an orders. Wonder now how many times she's done it. Been behind this bar, playing St. Peter. When she first begun here, she expressed interest in learning. So I taught her. and enjoyed it. Selva had her way. Even I, like saps on stools, fell beneath her spell. Charm is not overrated in the apron tool belt. As important in the multitasking as cashier and as dog catching would be walkouts before they make the street. Charm is currency. Buys a tip jar's worth forgiveness for the oft-occurring oversights. Orders forgotten, tables round the corner, out of sight ignored. Math and memory are tough to teach. But charm, if they don't got it, man, forget it. A server needs that charm much as the hand to hold the tray and sell the hat. So I'm not sure why she didn't use it. Even when I caught her, finishing a twist of lemon peel. She had an opportunity to spin it. I was standing, staring, waiting for an offering. Why? Instead, she just walked on by. With that drink on trade toward him with the swagger in her saunter like a lap of victory. Now I'm here, a man inside a bar. I can make it work. I can make it work just fine. You know, this very morning, I received 2 different phone inquiries. Parties looking for a space for same day, 1 week away. One for a reception, for a wedding. Kind of last minute arranged. Other for a wake. Equally unexpected. So left to me to choose which party made more economic sense. And I surprised them by suggesting, at the risk of losing both, that we could just find these 2 events combined. That each might enrich the other, adding an unseen layer to the cake, so to speak. A few more flowers for adorning tributes to the departed. It might surprise you, they agreed. Though, I don't know why that would surprise. Every night, in every bar, it's a quiet mix of lows and highs. And we are going to have one get down good old time. With pours of every color, man. And toasts of every kind. My grandma was not born here. War bride, GI generation. So the blood in her was from high in the Alps, Bavaria. She was something. Always worked. Had a list of tasks never ended, only way she knew to do. What else was life for? If she was here today, if her ghost came stomping in, man, she'd take one look at me here, mixing cocktails, pouring beer, and declare I've never worked. Or done an act sufficient worthy of the acts brought me to this world, built this world for me. She'd be right enough, I guess. Standard rule, you don't argue with anyone from World War II. I remember I was very young, in her kitchen, autumn day, probably hunting for some pie. Nonchalant, I don't know why, I opened up the cupboard underneath the kitchen sink. Just a kid on idle time. And I saw something down there. A bottle, unexpected, out of place. An amber-colored liquid. Turkey on the label. Unscrewed the cap and lifted it. And just a whiff, whoo! Enough to give me whiplash, like a contact high. So I quickly tried to screw the cap back on, fumbled with it, and it fell beneath the kitchen table. So went to knees and crawled, and soon as I was there, I saw those veins of Grandma's sandy varicose like purple strands of twine. And she spooked me with her holler. Wonder in what I was doing, 6 years old and underneath the table with an open whiskey bottle. Maybe if I'd had more years, her tone may have carried more heat. But she knew I wouldn't dare. And if I did, I wouldn't know that it was wrong to try to hide. Grandma reached down, took the bottle, took the cap and screwed it on. Then she bent a little as if to return it to its place, paused and tapped it with her finger. Bony finger in reproach. That's your grandpa's whiskey bottle. This is where he likes to hide it, since no one would ever look there. Now his grandson stumbled on his stash. Then instead she reached up high to the cupboard up above the oven, moved some of her cookbooks, placed the bottle in back corner, returned books to block the view. I could not even glimpse the cap. She laughed. Let's see if he can find his voodoo honey now. Then left, returning to her chores, and left me there in kitchen by myself, afraid of Grandpap coming in from fields. He was by then retired from the coal mine, collecting on black lung, focused on the farm. I knew one thing for certain, I would not be there to be suspect. Hustled home, volunteered to rake the leaves as alibi. And I braced that evening, but no word of anger reached me. Either Grandpap found his bottle or he hid another someplace else. So our lives went on. Grandpap was gone before I hit high school. Grandma kept on going, full of vinegar, even after couldn't walk, and had to recognize life could go on without chores. When she passed, and this was down the road, I flew back for the service. Then awkwardly, with relatives I'd never kept in touch with, rummaged through my grandma's house like yellow tape inspectors, searching for a deed or bread, something to divide. And I was in the kitchen, sitting at that same old table. My eyes fell on the cupboard underneath the kitchen sink. I could reach it from my chair, so I did, and pulled it open. Something waiting, summoned me. Like after all those years, and for the first time, I was re-examining that autumn day against things I'd learned since then. Label old, bottle dirty, nothing but a few shots left. I just knew that it would be there. Not up top behind the cookbooks. My hunch, rooted in reasoning, a startled 6-year-old don't got. Like Grandpa, if he had a ball and a need to hide it, surely would not choose a spot within his wife's primary space, where she scrambled morning breakfast, where she baked the evening roast. He had ample room in tool sheds, and the basement near that coal furnace where Grandma never stepped. On the other hand, the cupboard there beneath the sink, you could call that just about as deep into the kitchen you could get. The only time I ever saw my grandpap in that room was to grab a can of beer from out the fridge, take it to the couch, where as well he took his roast to better hear the TV news, artillery and mine machinery left close to death. So that whiskey had been Grandma's. Little helper safely hidden, meant to lubricate and fuel her through that endless list of chores. And return to normal storage probably as soon as I had fled, in fear or wrath of Grandpap, who was nothing but a patsy, unaware. We all have our hiding places. Secret bottles, not exclusively a masculine resort. That brings me back to Selva and her many hidden sampler sizes, plopped into our talks like fishing hooks into a pond. This was not her first time fishing, as was not the first I tasted hook and still bit down. She said, teach me something useful, not obscure, but regular requested. Something real bartenders make, but those who've never done so wouldn't know to stir or shake. So I said I'd think it over. There's a school of thought within the industry regarding craft. Think of a guitar. Think of my last roommate, Liam. Went out on a whim and bought himself a six-string out of want to put his soul to sound. A noble enough reason. After a day, he hopped online impatient, hoped to learn some three-chord classics, and he did. But that song itself, his soul to sound, was never heard or half composed. Guitar players come to it from many inspirations, and they number in the millions. But musician, that's a different category. That's a different thing. No matter if your first obsession is to play a riff you love, musicians come around to the beginning, tuning, training ears, learning through experiment, backdoor ways to front porch plays. That is a musician. That is the craftsman's way. Bartending is the same. So, Selva's insistence that I teach her speed rack style, how to make a drink that's made by elements themselves made carefully through processes and recipes, details she cared not to know. I choose thus for the Selva, the Negroni, a three-chord classic for a three-chord gal. Liquor is like a second tongue. Hear the Hong Kong sun. Nothing shines sophistication like it, as it spans from French to Japanese if your liver's got the range. Each drink with a dash of story. And the process lends itself to metaphor, like I am after here. Equal parts or death. Got it? Equal parts or death. The rule of thumb for the Negroni. First, the Campari. Now, thou shalt use Campari as red aperitif of choice. Some call a commander, others call cliche. Like Darwin. Darwin used to work with me at Spades, a diver artist. Mostly pours in there, but man, could that cat mix. He saw potential poetry woven within that situation. Hated the hipster snobs. Said their tips would stale the taste of packs of smokes he spent them on. Every now and then, you'd have somebody trying to impress their company. Order the martini or Manhattan or what have you in an effort like a choice of hat to stand above the pack. And Darwin would lean all the way in. Even though they paid $9, even though they tipped just one, they got a $15 drink. The kind that in a place like this can earn gratuity to match. And he'd watch them take their first sip, watch their eyes, and mouths and shoulders as they tasted something so much better than they thought they ordered. Expectations are the armor chink we mistake for our shield. And it don't take much to do it. Some attention, some good product, lots of ice, zest with flourish, proper glassware for the job, equal parts or depth for the Negroni with Campari, Then by tradition, you select your gin. Equal parts with gin from well is what we'll base the selva with. Since money meant so much for her, I think we'll protect our profit margin. That brings us to vermouth. Vermouth, so overlooked among the three, but it's equal parts or left round here. And in its quiet corner here, we have our crucial pour. It's funny. Who'd have thought? Italians were as deep devout to flavored wine as saints divine. But that flavored wine, that's amore. And that dedication can be the difference. The point is, no ingredient is relegated as an afterthought. Just as there are some selections only would be diminished by such a carnal combination. And Selva was. Selva could have been. She could have been like a top shelf something, but only thought herself worthy to be one more measured pour in the Negroni. And I hope she'd see it more my way and stay a while to learn a thing or two. Not just about the making of the honey, but about that voodoo. Otherwise, if mixing's all there is, what's a bartender? Stiff with a silver jigger, clown prop with pitcher and a spoon. I had this Shakespeare in here, an influence incognito. Ordered a Negroni, didn't speak, slow danced with it in his hand on stool. Then afterward, as a form of flattery, announced his move, that he judged a place entirely based on their house Negroni. When I laughed, he said, "You make it decent, man, but you'd be surprised how many muck it up." Thinking this a compliment, but it brought a rise in me. How, I asked, if you're so wise and expert on the subject, please the faults expose in processes of those who do not meet this mark of quality you dare declare? Say you like the drink. You had a good time in the moment, beginning, middle, and a perfect 10. The rest, the out of context others made with mercury and retrograde. It's tough enough to factor all them ghosts you brought on stools beside. I draw the line at trying to beat some swill sucked down on High Life Street. I wonder, yes, I wonder if that critique is heading to that new place by the ballpark, what he'll think of that. I heard of it talking with Detroit Ed at his farewell in Bon Voyage about the downtown diner scene's monthly disappearing. Plenty of places still for Joe, just not hash browns and over easies. And I mentioned automation, how they've got entire shops now churning out lattes better than any barista. I was just making a joke that they'll master those runny eggs like Mom on Larkin made them before they raised the rent beyond what runny eggs could pay. And Detroit Ed said, "You're next, old boy." Told me about the new place by the ballpark, where a person checks IDs at the door, the person seat and served. But the task of making orders, whether beer on draft or bottled, all the way to cocktails mixed or stirred, is handled by a four-armed headless freak of what's called progress. He never takes a tip and runs on batteries. and never shows up late. Because he never leaves. Well, that just made me roll my eyes, but Detroit Ed wanted my take. If I thought the first to go would be the poor horse, or the dives, or mixologists, like me. He said the easy answer is the dives are first transition. After all, it's mostly beer, but the bartender is more a presence there. A personality and therapist who now and then switches out a keg or cuts you off till 6 a.m. when that waltz begins again. Whereas your position, indisputably more skilled, but talent of a left-brain kind. And if your crowd is mostly paying for the final product, my wager would be on you. First to pass, bar to page. Still, I laughed and told him, D, machines can make a latte. I'll acknowledge it's a minor leap to margaritas and martinis, but you're missing, as they miss, the art of it. You underestimate appreciation for creation, for a fellow branch freefaller who mastered a craft while you were mastering another. Or you aspire to, as we all aspire by our nature. Nothing there relatable. That is not an acorn, sympathetic to the struggle for a space, not stressing over thunder or dancing in the rain. So I see a curiosity, but nothing to be afraid of. That's what I told Detroit Ed. And then that night I walked on over to the new place by the bar. And I saw a line of people waiting patiently to enter. Then last night, when Selva told me that she had applied there, a bar without bartender who you had to split your tips with, while the mans you sometimes had to cater. Then without a thanks or a call me later, Detroit Ed said, with the costs they save on labor and save on stock that's lost to spills, that the new place by the ballpark willingly remakes your drink. If you are not satisfied, even if it's mostly finished, without questioning your charge. They even have an option. There's a button on the screen. Bartender's choice. Then simply pick an emoji to inform how you are feeling. And that machine whips up something based, I guess, on how the ice is shaking, how the breeze is blowing through the door. Maybe algorithms and a history of that analyzed against that ID that they scanned on entry. I'll just keep doing them decent, you know, until they raise that rent beyond what decent dues will pay. Maybe decide what goes into Selva. It's not the order of the day, right? What should we put in the AJ? What sludge from bottom of her heel would Selva probably scraping there? What out of date, expired mush might that clever whiz tech extraordinaire? What would you? Half pour of hot air? Don't answer that either, by the way. The wake ain't till next week, guys. You're a week early for that. Let's go. Let's get started. So, a man walks in the bar, right? A man walks in the bar, walks all the way behind the bar, looks down at his tools, looks out at the faces on stools and asks, well, what's it going to be? Because I know you didn't come in here just on account of me. I don't know if every stage needs a star, but I do know that every show needs an after party. So, if you'd like to join me for a little doo-doo honey, I'll be in the cafe. Otherwise, enjoy your day. Thanks for coming to the Fringe, everybody.